This was something that we heard about and then we investigated during research for the book Exo Vaticana, which ultimately led us to the top of Mount Graham in Arizona. We were curious why. When the Vatican's Advanced Technology Telescope and the Large Binocular Telescope were being built, why did the indigenous peoples of Arizona, especially the San Carlos Apaches, why did they join environmentalists in filing dozens of lawsuits before a federal appeals court to try to stop the construction of the observations on Mount Graham? The project ultimately prevailed in favor of the Vatican and NASA after an act by the United States Congress ordered it to be done. But the question remained in our mind, why had the tribal communities fought so diligently against the construction of telescopes atop that mountain? Now, I had wrongly assumed that this was because Mount Graham was a sacred place, as in preceding generations of Native Americans had lived and died on it, and therefore it was considered holy ground, something like a graveyard. But I learned later that while that was partially true, it really wasn't the big issue. The real dispute surrounded how Mount Graham is considered one of the 4 holiest mountains in the world for the Apache and is considered sacred to all of the region's native peoples, and it is so because it is what we might call a stargate. In their mythos, a portal through which the star people have come since the dawn of time. And once we understood that fact, our suspicions as to why the Vatican and NASA had chosen that mountain in particular, even being willing to face a prolonged legal battle to build these telescopes on Mount Graham, including the largest binocular telescope in the world where the Lucifer device is kept, why would they have gone to all of that trouble? Why not just go to another mountain range and find basically the same height, the same environmental conditions? Why did it have to be that mountain? Now we came to learn another thing, and that is that the San Carlos Apache have these preserved ancient tales concerning Mount Graham and that geography, including stories very similar to biblical chronology. These legends involve a creator, a deceiving dragon that follows, an epic flood, and even a race of giants known as the Jindupids, who were judged and destroyed by God. According to the legend, a race of Indians called the Tartums lived in the valley between Tucson and Phoenix. These were just peaceful farmers, and they prospered until one day they were invaded by the Jindupids, described as Goliaths, who were so huge they used tree limbs for toothpicks. Well, these Nephilim were led by this massive man they call Evil Ken, who allegedly came from the northeast and were headed south to their home beyond the Gulf of Baja. These giants nearly wiped out the Tartums before they ran and hid themselves underground and in the mountains and prayed to Father Sun, who then threw this huge fireball that came down to the earth, seared the monstrous Nephilim into the scorched mountain rock, and wiped them out. Now, elements of that tale are obviously mythological, but it has a remarkable thematic coherence with Genesis chapter 6. The Apache creation myth is also interesting in this regard, as a particular version involves what they call the one who lives above, who descended down over the mountain in a flying disc at the start of creation. Their myth begins, in the beginning, nothing existed, no earth, no sky, no sun, no moon, only darkness was everywhere. And then the legend starts, before noting that suddenly from the darkness emerged a disc. One side of it was yellow, the other side of it was white. It appeared suspended in midair, and within the disc sat a bearded man, the creator, the one who lives above. Now, Besides this creator who rides in a heavenly disc, there's a dragon with the power of speech that turns up, bargaining with mankind, as well as supernatural gateways associated with mountains through which spirit beings have and can come. So suffice it to say that these ancient native ideas involving flying discs, flying creators, spirit guides, even owls and a talking dragon or a great serpent, and supernatural gateways tied to mountain ranges. This is something that began long before the Vatican cast its eyes on Mount Graham. Think how much these legends mirror what the Bible teaches, including the idea that mountaintops or high towers were often depicted as places where doorways into the supernatural could be opened. For instance, Nimrod of biblical fame sets out to build a tower whose top will reach into heaven, Genesis 11:4 says. This was the infamous Tower of Babel, and Nimrod was designing it so that the top of it would extend into Shamayim, heaven, the dwelling place of God. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, who it establishes was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, Gilgamesh, that he had built the Tower of Babel specifically to ascend into the presence of God, into the presence of Jehovah himself. And of course, God came down and said of the tower's design that nothing would be restrained from them which they have imagined to do, Genesis 11:6. So in other words, according to the Lord himself, Nimrod would have accomplished what he imagined to do, and that is to build a tower whose top would reach into the abode of God. Even the name Babylon implies that, echoing the North and South American Indian beliefs about towering gateways and the meaning gate of God or gateway to God. Now, that there could be sacred locations where those beings that can see into the supernatural realm could literally walk onto a high place and enter heaven is really not as far-fetched as it sounds. There are numerous records, including in the Bible, that appear to substantiate the idea that heaven can be attained on high towers or mountainous locations. So think about Moses meeting with God on Sinai, Jesus returning atop the Mount of Olives, the 200 watchers that descended in the days of Jared on the summit of Mount Hermon, and other examples, including Jacob's ladder. Not only did Dr. Mose substantiate the age-old and globally recorded story of those who come through portals and the impact that they have had on biblical and global history, past and present, not only did he weave Navajo Indian myths and legends seamlessly with our understanding of the 6 days of creation, the arrival of the Nephilim, and their connection to judgment by a global flood, followed by the repopulating of people around the world, and then a second incursion of the giants. But there were several instances in which, when I pushed Dr. Mose for greater detail, he would go off script, actually delineating from the official Navajo storyline to provide greater consistency between history and the way the Bible itself recorded certain events. For example, as Mose was following the official storyline, the one that you would get from the Parks Department in the four corners of the U.S., about how the Anasazi didn't disappear, but rather they slowly migrated out of the area and became the modern Pueblo Indians, I expressed doubts to Dr. Mose about that story. And he responded by grinning just a little bit and saying, well, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but, and then he proceeded to tell us the older stories that his grandfather had repeated about these mysterious people actually disappearing after they came under mind control from a reptile with a halo, this carnivorous creature, suspiciously similar to what I later described in the Path of the Immortals book as fiery seraphim, which comes from the Hebrew seraph, the Hebrew Old Testament, fiery serpent.
All throughout Chaco Canyon are these massive circular structures called kivas. The kivas are perfect circles that are built into the earth for the purpose of magic rituals, ceremonies, and religious practices. They were used extensively by the Anasazi, who, according to their own verbal history, used the kivas to summon monstrous creatures into this dimension.
Now, another case in point is when I told Dr. Mose what we had learned from the Apache about cannibalistic giants and then God destroying them in a flood. And he looks right into the camera and he says, "Oh, yes." And then he reaches over and he picks up this illustrated book that he had authored that's used in the Navajo Nation schools and libraries. And he opened to show us an artist depiction of a giant that had stood between 30 and 40 feet tall. And then he starts saying there was this time when the earth was infested with such great giants and alien gods that came down and destroyed and ate the people. Some of them were in human form. Others, he said, were monsters like human-animal hybrids, which I think the Old Testament also describes. And then he followed that story with the famous Navajo legend of the White Shell Woman, who gave birth to two of the most important characters in Navajo mythology, the twin miracle-performing sons, one of whose names literally translates slayer of alien gods, and his twin brother. And together, those two great warriors killed many of the giants, hybrids, and the monsters that were destroying mankind. As Dr. Mose described these ancient tales, I couldn't help but think of David killing Goliath, and then later other giants with his mighty men. Then there was a point where Mose paused, and he said, "You know, when the Christian missionaries first came to America and told our people their stories of the giants and the great flood, he said, we smiled and let them know that we already knew these stories, that they had been told to us long ago by our own ancestors."
We know that the ancient ones used petroglyphs in order to document their history and events that happened to them. Petroglyphs like this, the spiral. The spiral is found over and over again in almost every ancient culture worldwide. The spiral symbol can be found from the jungles of Peru to the frozen tundras of Siberia. The spiral can be seen as a symbol of a portal, an interdimensional portal used by entities as a transport between worlds. This is evident by the petroglyphs and the stories they tell. Now, let's take a look at some of the petroglyphs we found during our exploration of Chaco Canyon. What we see here are depictions of supernatural creatures coming directly out of the spiral and manifesting themselves in our reality. Over and over again, we see the same imagery carved into the walls. Literal monsters emerging from these spirals, and oftentimes you can see they are still connected to the spiral, and other times they're standing right next to it. You also see images of humans getting sucked into the spiral upside down, and on the other side emerges a monster. This is a common theme throughout the canyon, and these depictions can be found at numerous petroglyph sites in Chaco Canyon, and they all seem to be telling us the same exact story. During our investigation of the canyon, we came across several interesting petroglyphs, depictions of monsters, dragons, gray aliens, and weird-looking beings. But I never found what I was looking for. We searched the entire park for the 6-toed footprints of the Nephilim giants. These footprints have been documented numerous times by mainstream publications, yet they're nowhere to be found. I started to wonder, maybe they're hiding the footprints. So I decided to stop a park ranger and ask him. The conversation went a little bit like this. "Oh, excuse me, sir. Can I ask you a quick question?" And the ranger replies, "Yes, absolutely. What can I help you find?" "I'm looking for these 6-toed footprints that were carved in the canyon wall behind Casa Bonita. Do you know where those are?" The ranger says, "Ah, yes, those footprints. They're located in an off-limits area. Unfortunately, we closed it off to the public." Closed to the public. makes you wonder what else they have closed off to the public. And as we were about to leave the park, we decided to go and watch the 30-minute video inside the visitor center. And what we saw was shocking. They showed us petroglyphs from inside the park like no other we have ever seen. Perfectly clear images of interdimensional beings with pyramids stacked on top of their head. We walked through the entire park and did not see these petroglyphs. So it made me wonder, where are these petroglyphs and what else are they hiding from us? In 1999, an anthropologist working for the University of Utah published a book entitled Man-Corn: Cannibalism and Violence in the Prehistoric American Southwest. The term man-corn is the literal translation of the Aztec word tiactaluay, which refers to a quote sacred meal of sacrificed human meat cooked with corn. In Turner's book, they provide evidence of cannibalism in 72 ancient Anasazi sites, including Chaco Canyon. Forensic evaluations of bones found at these sites proves they were cannibalized. But the question is by whom? Who were eating the Anasazi? After the collapse of Chaco Canyon, around 1150 AD, the remaining members of the Anasazi spread out and separated. They moved deep into remote canyons and started building their new dwellings high up on cliff faces or on highly fortified mesas. To archaeologists, it's as if the Anasazi were overtaken by some strange paranoia, hiding from some terrible enemy, but no matter how hard they looked, no enemy was found. Or was it?